Sorry about that interruption. But anyway, like I was saying, they had his family. They had Fred Offerman, believe it or not. Oh no, Fred Ottoman. Fred Ottoman. You might know him basically as Tugboat, Typhoon, and most notably as the Shockmaster in WCW. And they touched upon his career too. What this was kind of like in a way, what this was kind of like in a way was, I wouldn't say it was similar, but it was um, almost identical in how they did the Chris Benoit story. How like the first part of Chris Benoit's story was about Eddie Guerrero and Benoit, dealing with that, and then the second part was mostly about him. And you know, and that's kind of how it felt a little bit, but it was more emphasis on Tenta here. But yeah, they talked about, like I said, his run in All Japan Pro Wrestling and everything, and how it was the great Kabuki, who is a wrestler that you might know of from his time in WCCW to to his time in very brief time in WWE, and he also had a run in WCW when it was under the NWA banner. But he was mostly known for his time in Old Japan. Great Kabuki was the one that told him when he basically made it known that WWF had come calling, that Great Kabuki's like, go and do it, go take that opportunity, and he did, and they showed how he debuted and everything, and how his feud with Hulk Hogan really just catapulted him, to the very top as a monstrous, villainous heel and everything. And, they did a great job with that. They really did. I think I mentioned they also had Jake the Snake on here too. And the reason they had Jake the Snake is because Jake knew about him. And Jake, I think, mentioned that he was kind of impressed that someone, would catch on, that quickly, like he did, is, in wrestling, pro wrestling, that is. But anyway, they had Jake there because one of the things with Jake, if you will, one of the things with Jake is the notable angle where they had Earthquake squash Damien. But as we know from a behind the scenes standpoint, it really wasn't Damien that he squashed in the bag. It was a it was a bunch of women's pantyhose, just stuffed with hamburger, raw hamburger, and everything. And they showed the part of the angle where he was on prime time feeding McMahon and Heenan Quake burgers, which were made from the squashed carcass of Damien. So they did that. Again, they did a decent job, in my opinion, of emphasizing why he was such a monstrous villain. Why he was in such a way and everything. They touched upon, him and Typhoon, him and Fred becoming the natural disasters. What they didn't show, though, was how that happened. And I was kind of surprised by that because the way it happened, and I saw it live when it happened on Superstars, or when it was aired on Superstars, I should say. And it was basically Earthquake and the Nasty Boys in a six-man tag against Tugboat, as he was known at the time, and the Bushwhackers. And Tugboat basically during the match turned his back on the Bushwhackers and aligned himself with Jimmy Hart, Jimmy Hart and Earthquake and the Nasty Boys. And I remember this one shot of them walking, arm in arm with each other like this, all the arms on on the shoulder, just walking off and everything, together. And I think and again, they did one thing they didn't show either was Ottoman's promo when he basically went from when he was introduced now as Typhoon. But basically they went over their career and how they became tag champs and everything, and how unlike some of the other guys out there, guys and girls out there. Oh, they also had Jerry Sags too. They also had Jerry Sags and the Nasty Boys on there. But like I said, the way they talked about this, essentially, the way they talked about this was, again, unlike some of the other boys and girls that were wrestling, they weren't the kind to go out and party. Instead, they would just be in the back playing cards, wolfing down food, if you will, because according to Jake, they could put that away. They could. Um, but yeah, they talked about the run in there, the run there, and everything. I'm kind of now. They did talk about, of course, Tugboat, not Tugboat, but Fred Ottoman leaving the company due to the fact that there was a tragedy. And what had happened is that after another thing they didn't talk about, and this is one thing that sometimes I think you could be grateful for things like Wikipedia for having. Basically, after the '93 Rumble, according to Wikipedia, after the '93 Rumble, losing because basically, he had two more nights in the WWF in '93, so, and that was a house show lost, by count out to Bam Bam Bigelow, and then the Royal Rumble, and then he was gone. He had left WWF, and he went back to Japan and competed for the War Company, for the War promotion, which was short for Wrestling Association R. He went to go work for them, and then he also had a brief stint, believe it or not, with CMLL, the very same CMLL that Tony Khan and AEW are currently working with. So they didn't touch upon that, nor did they touch upon his return in January 1994, in his match with, when he came to the aid of Bret Hart against Shawn Michaels and Diesel, his quick squash match against Adam Bomb at WrestleMania 10, or basically his feud with Yokozuna. Even though they touched upon his sumo background, they didn't touch upon that, and everything. They didn't touch upon how he was scheduled to be, in the King of the Ring, but was injured by Yokozuna and Crush, at a house show in San Jose, and then that's how Doink became his replacement, and that he also disappeared. And this is according to Wikipedia, and they're filling in the gaps, and I'm betting Solomonster, if you're watching, you'll fill in the gaps as well when you go over this on Sunday. But basically, he again disappeared from WWF after that and returned to Japan for the Wrestling Association R, the War promotion. Now, they do touch upon the very infamous shoot situation that he had with Kaijo Kituo, who was also a former sumo wrestler, sumo champion. And WWF would always have these, and this was in the early to mid 90s. WWF would have these joint promotions in Japan with the Super World of Sports. Basically they were another Japanese promotion, and they were one of the Japanese promotions, if not the only Japanese promotion, that worked with WWF on equal bounds. In other words, they didn't mind if WWF put some of their guys over, and, in exchange, WWF would let some of their guys go over, and so on. Anyway, basically, they talked about the incident between them and how it was booked, as a battle of two former sumo wrestlers, sumo champions. And they state, because we always wondered, I'm sure a lot of people always wonder, like, okay, when did this this legit shoot situation, happen? When did it really happen? And it happened basically in their second night working together. It was because the first night it happened was, I think, in Tokyo, and then the second night was at Kobo Hall, in Kobo Hall, I believe, in Kobo, Japan, or in the city of Hyogo, Pacifica, Japan. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Or just Kobo, if you will. Kobo, Japan, at Kobo Hall. Anyway, it was the second match there where basically doing it, Koji broke kayfabe. He broke kayfabe, and it caused Tenta to break kayfabe. And what happened is that, Koji went out to the outside, and everything, and I guess through tables or something like that, or Well, actually, what happened, and I'm reading it here just to refresh my memory, because they did, like I said, allude to this in Dark Side of the Ring. What happened is that Koji basically was being, like I said, he broke kayfabe because he was being uncooperative. He was not selling, any of John's attacks. He didn't sell his attacks, and he basically shot on him. And John legitimately shot back. He legitimately kicked him, in retaliation. And what happened is Koji didn't attack the referee. He kicked him, according to the Wikipedia here, and I think they did bring that up in Dark Side of the Ring. But Koji, got disqualified, and then after the match, and they did show footage of this. They had actual camera footage of this. Not reenactments or anything. Actual home video footage of this, of Koji going out there and telling the audience, that Tenta was paid to cheat, that wrestling is fake, and that Tenta can never really beat him. And basically, again, this is shown. This is shown. Hopefully, if I can find an upload of the episode, you'll see it, at the end of the video here. But this was shown, like I said, this was shown on the Dark Side episode, where Koji basically mentioned it, said all this, basically exposed the business, if you will. And you had a lot of wrestlers, Japanese wrestlers, trying to restrain him. And they showed that in the footage. Now, what also happened afterwards, and this did lead to Koji being fired from Super World of Sports, SWS. But what happened when Earthquake got back to the States, a lot of the wrestlers who didn't go over there actually heard about what happened and, congratulated him for standing up for the business and, standing up to this, this a-hole, if you will, this a-hole who's basically shitting on the business. He was shitting on the business, and, they congratulated him, and they gave more, and he ended up getting a lot more respect out of that. And then, of course, like I said, they mentioned about the realm of the natural disasters, which, again, I'm surprised they didn't show how that formation came, nor did they mention his return to WWE briefly in '94 and all that and everything, because, like I said, they did touch upon Ottoman leaving, because what happened is Ottoman was in the States. They both were doing their own thing at the time, and Ottoman was still wrestling for WWE. He was still wrestling for WWE at the time. And what happened is that basically he was doing a show that Ottoman's nephew, I think his brother-in-law and nephew, got shot. His nephew or brother-in-law, I gotta look it up, but his nephew, he got shot and everything in the chest, because there was let me see if it'll say here. Let me see if it'll say it here and everything. Let me see. Let me see here. Let me see. It doesn't say, but basically they mentioned, basically that, his family member, nephew, brother-in-law got shot in the chest, and that person owned a nightclub, and there was like some kind of scuffle going on, and his family member was on the phone talking with somebody. I don't know if he was talking about, or talking to him or something, but basically, his family member lost a life. And again, I don't know if it was the brother-in-law or nephew, but they lost a lot. They lost a life tragically, and this weighed heavily on Ottoman, and he had to depart WWE. He had to depart them, and then that led him to, of course, going to WCW as the Sharkmaster. And of course, they did show the footage of that happening. But what's interesting is Haku, who was another person they had. I forgot to mention. I think I mentioned that. Did I? No, I don't think I did. But yeah, they had Haku as another Tarkin head as well, along with Jake and all them. And Haku had never seen it. Jake the Snake had never seen it. And Jake was in WCW the year prior, so he wasn't there when this happened. But basically, he was, he basically was again, okay. Well, I'm trying to think about what I'm trying to say here. I'm not trying to lose my train of thought. I'm trying to think what I'm trying to say. Oh yeah. They had never, that's what I was trying to say. They had never, because I have the Ottoman's profile here on Google, so I do apologize for that. That's what's distracting me. But sorry if I spaced out too. That's my fault. I was trying to think about what I was going to say. But anyway, they had, like I said, they had Akua there. They had Jake the Snake. And they had never seen this. And like I said, Jake was there before, a year prior. So they were seeing it for the first time. And you think they would have seen it by now, being on the internet, all over YouTube and in all the places. And they had never seen it. They had never seen it. And they got a kick out of it. They were just laughing their asses off on it and everything. But yeah, they showed that. And they showed, and Ottoman's basically taken, he's taking kind to it. He's accepted it. Like, yeah, it wasn't supposed to go that way, but what are you going to do? So he's made a living out of that, and he showed the figures he has, the elite figures of him and Earthquake as the natural disasters, and the classic superstar figure of him as Shockmaster and everything. But anyway, they showed that and everything, but I don't think they showed him returning, because I think he did. I'm going to look this up. I think he did return to WWE. I'm not really sure. Let me see. Yeah, he did return to WWE in 94. Basically a month or two, or basically around, he was there around the same time Earthquake was, but they weren't, teamed together anymore. They weren't teamed together anymore. And, they, again, and basically, he was used as enhancement talent on television and in house shows before leaving in the summer of that year as well. But yeah, they didn't touch upon the fact that he and Earthquake were back at the same time. That was kind of surprising. That was kind of surprising and everything. Anyway, they did touch upon how he had to leave because of that. And what they did touch upon as well is that, the wrestling schedule on the WWE was very straining for John and his family. And Josephine let it be known to him, like, yeah, this, if you want this to work out, you got to lighten the schedule up, if we're going to work this out. So John basically, I think gave notice to WWE that, he couldn't do it anymore. He couldn't do it anymore, as Earthquake. He couldn't do it anymore as Earthquake and everything. And he left. He gave WCW a call. All and everything. Well, again, he didn't actually give him WCW a call. And again, this is one thing they didn't touch upon is, like I mentioned earlier, he left in 94, I think a little before Typhoon did. And he went to the Wrestling Association R, and basically from there he contacted WCW, and they gave him a good contract to come over for with a lighter schedule so he can be with his family. So his family moved from where they were in Canada to Florida, and and basically, he was able to spend more time with his family and everything. And another thing they didn't touch upon, this is something I always wish they would touch upon, but I understand time restraints and everything, and that's why Dark Side of the Ring now has the Unheard podcast that you can find on YouTube, and I'm sure your various podcast affiliates, where you can get more inside of the story. But yeah, if there's one thing, one thing I wish they would expand more on, if not briefly, is touch upon his brief stints elsewhere outside of the States, and outside besides all Japan and everything. And they did talk about he worked a tour before going to WCW. He worked a tour of UWF International where he teamed up with Vader, and then he came into WCW as Avalanche, and that lasted for several months, and then they had to change it because of legal trademark infringements. Basically, even though it was a different name, the persona he was giving off and the movements and everything, like his finisher, too similar to WWE. And even Jake said, "Hey, look, if you think you're gonna walk out on Vince McMahon without paying a price, you wrong." And John had to pay that price. So basically, they go over his career in WCW, how he went from being Avalanche, but that didn't last long, to him being the Shark, which apparently, even his family is like, really, because when he presented what he was going to do or what he was going to be now, to them it was like, his explanation was it's work. They say it's going to get over, and everything, but it didn't. But it didn't because, it wasn't who he was. It wasn't, what fans knew him as. So they went over his entire career and everything in WCW, including him going just to be himself, John Tenta. Then after that, basically they talked about him going back to WWE as Gorgon, as part of the as Golga, actually as Golga, as part of the Oddities stable, along with Luna and Giant Silva and so on. But yeah, they talked about him going back to WWF as Golga, and the reason for it, and they didn't touch upon this. I don't think they did. I don't think they touched upon this. It's because of the fact that he lost weight. He lost weight, if you will, to the point that he couldn't pass, as Quake anymore. He couldn't be Earthquake. And even they were wondering, it's like, why didn't they, if they wanted him back, why didn't they just let him be Earthquake? Bring him back, because the fans wanted it. The fans wanted Quake back. But I think the reason, in my opinion, it wasn't done that way is because WWE was the Attitude Era, and their mindset was a gimmicky character like Earthquake would not get over. But yet here you had the Oddities. What are you going to do? You're placing them in. What are you going to do? So after the run with the Oddities and everything in WWE, he left. He left and everything. And basically his last appearance in WWE, I'm trying to read this here, and that's another reason I'm kind of like trying to think about what I'm going to say and why it feels like I'm spacing out at times or trying to, come up with my next word. Basically, of course, I'm doing this unscripted, but I'm also trying to read off the information here. So again, I do apologize if this is not the best I can do when it comes to a review of Dark Side of the Ring. But that's how I am. That's how you're going to roll. Solomonster does the same thing when he's recording his podcast on Sundays, and he's talking about this because even he had a review. I think it was doing. I don't know if it was Bash at the Beach he was viewing, the Dark Side of the Ring on I don't know if it was when he was. I don't know. Excuse me. I don't know if it was he was reviewing the Dark Side of the Ring episode of Bash at the Beach, 2000, but it was during his review. His iPhone goes off, his series goes off, and everything, and he's like, "Oh my goodness, I think my phone just had a stroke." So hopefully he doesn't have to deal with that again. But even someone like him deals with these kind of things. But yeah, they basically mentioned here on Wikipedia, and again, they didn't mention too much about this on Dark Side of the Ring. Basically, the last appearance was. The last appearance in WWE was on an edition of Sunday Night Heat. After the Ministry of Darkness, which was the Undertaker's stable at that time, beat them down, and Kurgan lost to the Undertaker and Kurgan, another big guy, lost to the Undertaker, and then all the members were released. Now, what's interesting though is during that time, Tenta would work independently. He would do some shows in England and Canada, according to Wikipedia. As well as, here in the States, he'd do some independent work. And then he returned, like I mentioned, in the Gimmick Battle Royal. And then he had a dark match later that year in December, prior to SmackDown. And you can find the dark match here on YouTube and everything. But again, I'm kind of surprised they didn't touch upon after the Gorgon thing, the Golga thing. They didn't touch upon him coming back for the gimmick battle royal, nor doing the independence in between, or even having that dark match on SmackDown. They did show an image of him in a ring that wasn't, that seemingly looked like to be in a high school or a community gymnasium. So that might have been a picture from his independent work. But again, they didn't touch upon anything else outside of that. They did, I think they did talk about him going back to Japan for a little bit in wrestling. But it's almost like they kind of skewed over, the later portions of his wrestling career. Even the brief returns to WWE, like I mentioned. And they talked about how he opened up a wrestling school, which I didn't even know about. But that didn't last too long, mainly like a year, barely that. And then they talked about how he went from that to being, working in the big and tall at a mall and retail, in a clothing store, in a big and tall clothing store, retail, job, if you will, in a mall. And even Jake's like, how can, and even Jake the Snake's like, can you imagine, going from being where you were, feuding with someone like Hulk Hogan, to now working retail? And apparently everybody recognized him when he did that. And then when that didn't work out, he went and became a truck driver because it made a little bit more money, that he could help provide for his family, because that was his main focus, was his family. That was his main focus, was his family. And apparently it was during one of his truck stops that he noticed blood clots were coming out of his urine, because he would have to relieve himself in, according to his son, jug gallons, if you will, because he was a truck driver, and you basically didn't have time to really stop because you were almost constantly on the road. So it was during this, in the reenactment, that they showed he had discovered he had some blood clots and everything forming, and everything in his urine, and they found out it was bladder cancer. Is what they found out. It was bladder cancer, and they showed the reenactment of them going to the doctors, finding out the diagnosis of what it was, and then telling the kids and everything. And it sounded like for a bit that it went back into remission. It's basically the way they made it sound like is it went back into remission and everything seemed to be okay, but then he called his wife, and then he called Fred Ottoman, or somebody called Fred Ottoman on his behalf, saying the cancer came back. And it was even worse because it wasn't just the bladder cancer, it was a tumor. It was a tumor that was spreading throughout his body and affecting him. And basically, it was so bad that, of course, he had to get chemo. They showed footage, reenactments of him bald and everything, and they showed even images of him bald and everything, because that's what you go through. That's what you go through when it comes to chemo, unfortunately. So they showed that, and basically, after that, after that, trying to think of what else they mentioned. Oh yeah, they mentioned that he was there for his son's wedding, his son's wedding, if you will, his son that he married into with Josephine, his son's wedding. And they mentioned that his wife, who was a entertaining singer. She was an entertainer singer, not famous or anything, but someone that just gets like jobs here and there. They mentioned, at the beginning how he met her in Japan, as I talked about earlier, and how they just hit it off from there. And they mentioned that, and she even sang a little bit, like right at the beginning, of the episode, and you can tell she's getting emotional because she still loves him even though he's no longer with her. But what happened is that they showed the reenactment of the reception, and her getting up there and singing a song, and breaking down and crying because the song she was singing was towards John. It's called, I think, "When You Needed Me" or something. I don't know what the song. I can't remember the song title, but something like "When You Needed Me." and she was breaking down and crying, and they showed this image of them all embracing because they knew, John pretty much was not long for the world, and it wasn't long after that, it wasn't, long after that that he had passed away. They showed, and this is where it kind of got very sad, very dark, if you will. They basically showed, the reenactment of him being on a hospital bed in his final hours, and they talked about, and they have all the kids mentioning, he was mentioning the fact that he would see them one by one, and then I guess all together, and basically his daughter says, he said something to her, and then holding her hand, he just, while he was holding her hand, he passed away. And then what was interesting is that when they talked about his funeral, they said that no wrestlers had attended the funeral. Nobody from WWE, no one from WCW, All Japan, War, nobody. Nobody had come to pay respects. It was just family. It was just family and everything. Now, here's the thing. I'm not saying the lying and all that. I'm not saying that. But there had to be somebody. There had to be a few folks that attended that knew him and everything. There had to be some that went there and paid their respects. But maybe that's, when it was, I guess, open casket or something, just to pay the respects. Maybe that's when the wrestlers came and then they left because the schedule's busy. So I don't know. But apparently nobody came to attend the funeral and everything. Apparently nobody came to, attend it. And, he, like I said, he passed away and everything after that. He passed away and everything after that. And I think they said what he was. Yeah, they say he's, and they actually have it here. He was put to rest, according to, from what they said here, and I just want to confirm it, at Mount Olivet Catholic Cemetery, in Dickinson, Galveston County, Texas. That's where he was laid to rest. Now, I know some people might say, well, why didn't they lay him to rest in Florida? I think it's mainly because of the fact that, they didn't want to or anything, or I think maybe it's because they moved. I think it's because they moved at that time to Texas. I'm not really sure. Or maybe maybe I can't remember. Can't remember. I think maybe it's I don't know. I think it's because that's what Josephine is. I'm not really sure. But yeah, he's buried in Texas. He's buried in Texas and everything. And they have, and that's where she's at because they have her name on the tombstone as well for when she passes. So she'll be buried right next to him when her time comes. So yeah. Overall, it ended on a somber note. It did show them, sitting around a table looking at pictures. And one of the first pictures that Josephine and John took together was in Japan at Christmas. And John had wrote something on there, and she was reading it, and she was kind of starting to tear up a little bit, and everything. So, yeah, it ended on a somber note, kind of a happy somber note, to where they remember all the good times. They even, show the daughters even, holding up his old singlet and everything. So yeah, it ended on sort of a happy somber note, but yeah, it was. As far as a season premiere episode, this was pretty good. Wasn't too dark until at least the end, if you will, because of the way it ended. But yeah, it was decent. It was really decent. Next week they're gonna do Buff Bagwell. It's called Buff and the Bagwells. That's what it's called. Legitimately, it's called Buff and the Bagwells. They're gonna be doing that next week, and then I think after that, I'm not really sure which ones are next after that. So Buff and the Bagwells is next. That's next week. I'm not sure what the episode is after that. That's the question. I'm not really sure what the episode is after that. I'm not really sure. I'm gonna look here on Wikipedia again. Okay, so the next one, according to Wikipedia, they could be wrong, but the next one is after Buff and the Bagwells, which is next week. On the 19th, we're going to have Saving Face. Not Saving Face, but on the 19th, the Saving Face one will be the week after, but on the 19th, we have Terry Gordy, Final Flight of the Freebird. And then on the 26th, we have Saving Face, the Brutus Beefcake story. So yeah, next week we'll have one on Buff Bagwell, Marcus Bagwell. Then we'll have Terry Gordy. Then we'll have Brutus Beefcake. And then after that, it's still to be determined. But if I was to guess in anything, I'm going to go with the fifth one being Chris Colt. I got a feeling the next one will be Chris. I got a feeling the one that comes the week after the 26th, like the week I'm probably in Kansas for visiting my father, if that happens. I've got a feeling that one's going to be Chris Colt. I don't know why. Now, I could be wrong. It could be Adams. It could be Sherry. It could be Sandman. We'll see. It could be Harley Race, for all we know. Even Black Saturday, for all we know. But anyway, that's the next one coming up. Buff Bagwell, Buff and the Bagwells. Then Terry Gordy, Final Flight of the Freebird. And then Saving Face, the Brutus Beefcake story. So, anyway, though, guys, that's about it. Again, I thought it was a decent beginning to Season 5 of Dark Side of the Ring. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. I do appreciate those on Rumble coming to give me advice to want to help promote my stuff. If you want to do that, go ahead, promote it. If you want to do that, go ahead and promote it. I'll give you that permission right now. Go ahead and promote it. Hopefully without any issue, because I will know. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section, and those watching on YouTube, let me know what your thoughts are in the live chat and in the comment section as well. But until next time, guys, let me know how you all feel about it, and what episode are you looking forward to next when it comes to Dark Side of the Ring. And until then, I am out.